I came home unannounced from my hospital evening shift, exhausted after a long night in the ER. It was past midnight, the streets were empty, and the cold air stung my face as I walked up to the house. I expected silence inside, maybe the soft hum of the heater, and the thought of finally resting gave me a small sense of relief. But then I stopped. On the front step, outside the locked door, I saw my mother and my daughter. They were not inside where it was warm. They were sitting on the hard ground, curled up against each other, trying to fight off the freezing night. My little Ava clung to her grandmother, her small body trembling, her breath showing in the air like smoke. My mother, Helen, was weak and pale, her arms wrapped around the child, her thin coat offering almost no protection. For a second I could not move. My stomach twisted, and it felt like the world tilted under my feet. Then I dropped my bag and rushed to them. "Mom! Ava!" My voice cracked as I reached down and pulled them close. Their skin was icy cold, their fingers stiff. Ava whimpered into my chest, too cold even to speak, while my mother coughed, her breath rough and shallow. I turned to the door and saw it locked tight. Not just closed, locked from the inside. My keys shook in my hands as I shoved one into the lock. Whoever was inside had thrown them out deliberately. This was no mistake. I pushed the door open and hurried them inside. The warmth of the heater hit me, but it only made me angrier knowing that my family had been sitting outside in the freezing dark while others sat inside comfortably. I guided them to the couch and quickly grabbed every blanket I could find. I wrapped Ava first, tucking the fabric around her small body, then draped another around my mother. "Hold on, Mom. You're safe now," I whispered, though my throat felt tight. Ava clung to me, her tears soaking into my shirt. Helen leaned back weakly, coughing, her frail frame shaking under the blanket. I went to the kitchen, heated water, and brought them warm tea, holding the cup to my mother's lips. Her hands shook too badly to grip it. Ava sipped from her own cup slowly, her teeth still chattering. I rubbed her back, fighting the storm inside me. From down the hall, I could hear voices and movement. They were still awake. My husband's family had sat in warmth and comfort, while my mother and daughter froze on the doorstep. My chest burned with fury, but I stayed quiet, because right then the only thing that mattered was making sure my mother and daughter survived that night. As I held them close, I knew one thing with certainty. This was no accident, and it would never be forgiven. When I first met Ethan, he was warm and full of charm. He made me laugh when I was buried under the stress of nursing school, and he told me I was the strongest woman he had ever known. Back then, I believed him. He spoke about building a life together, one where we supported each other through everything. I thought I had found a partner who would stand beside me no matter what came. But after marriage, it became clear he was not as strong as he had seemed. His mother, Patricia, was always present, always ready with a sharp word. She had a way of making me feel like a guest in my own home. She would look at the clock when I came in late from a shift and shake her head, saying things like, "Family should come before strangers in a hospital." I wanted to shout that I worked those hours so we could all live under this roof, but instead I stayed quiet, hoping Ethan would speak for me. He never did. Nicole, his sister, was no better. She followed her mother's lead, making comments about my clothes, my cooking, even how I raised Ava. She called me selfish for leaving Ava with my mother while I worked, even though she knew I had no other choice. They acted as if my career was a flaw, as if the money I brought home meant nothing. I thought Ethan would step in, but he only sat in silence. Sometimes he even nodded along. His silence cut deeper than their insults. It was as if he agreed with them, as if everything I sacrificed for this family was invisible. There were nights I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he still loved me. I would remember the man who once held my hand and told me I was his anchor, and I would wonder where that man had gone. Instead, there was someone who avoided conflict, someone who allowed his family to tear me down piece by piece. The hardest part was knowing they never saw my mother and daughter as part of the family. Patricia treated Helen like a burden, someone who had overstayed her welcome. Nicole never hid her disdain when Ava laughed too loudly or left toys around. It was always me they blamed, never themselves. I told myself to endure it for the sake of peace, to keep my head down and focus on my work, but the cracks kept growing. Every insult, every cold glance, every silence from Ethan chipped away at me until I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. And after what happened tonight, I could no longer deny it. Their act had been deliberate, cruel, and unforgivable. It proved what I had long feared. They never truly accepted me or the people I loved. I sat with my mother and daughter until they finally stopped shaking. When I knew they were warm enough to rest, I stood up and walked down the hall. My steps were heavy, but my anger pushed me forward. The light was still on in the living room. Ethan sat on the couch with his mother and sister, as if nothing had happened. The sight of them comfortable inside while my family nearly froze outside made my stomach twist. I looked straight at Ethan. My voice came out sharp and loud. Why were my mom and daughter left outside in the cold? I demanded. He didn't flinch. He only leaned back, his face calm, almost bored. Then he shrugged. Your mom was being nosy again, he said flatly. And Ava was making too much noise. They were disturbing the house. I could barely believe what I was hearing. My mother was sick, my daughter was a child, and his excuse was that they were a disturbance. I took a step closer, my hands trembling. Before I could speak, Patricia lifted her chin and cut in. Helen disrespected my home, she said coldly. She doesn't know her place. I won't have her walking around here like she owns it. Nicole sat beside her, smirking like she was enjoying the show. She crossed her arms and said, You should be grateful we've even tolerated them this long. Most families wouldn't. Her voice was dripping with mockery, and the smile on her face made me want to scream. I turned back to Ethan, waiting for him to correct them, to stand up for me, for Ava, for my mother. But he didn't. He just sat there, staring at me with tired eyes, as if I was the one causing a problem. Not once did he tell his mother or sister they were wrong. Not once did he defend me. The silence from him hurt more than their words. My chest felt tight, and for a moment I thought I might not be able to breathe. I had hoped that even if his family hated me, he would at least be fair. Instead, he sat with them, part of their cruelty, and made me feel like an outsider in my own house. I wanted to shout, to break something, to shake him and make him see the pain he was causing. But the look on his face told me it would be useless. He wasn't going to choose me. He wasn't going to choose Ava. He wasn't going to choose my mother. He had already chosen them. I stood there, staring at the three of them, and I understood the truth. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. What happened tonight was deliberate. And I was completely alone in that house. The morning after that night, I could hear my mother coughing before I even left my bedroom. The sound was harsh and heavy, rattling through her chest. When I stepped into the living room, she was sitting up on the couch, her blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her face looked pale, and every cough seemed to drain her strength a little more. I brought her warm tea and tried to act calm, but inside I was boiling with anger and guilt. Ava was no better. She had cried herself to sleep, but it wasn't real rest. In the middle of the night, she woke up screaming. I rushed to her room and found her shaking, her small hands gripping the blanket so tightly her knuckles turned white. Don't let them lock me out again, she sobbed. I held her close and promised it wouldn't happen, but I could feel her body trembling against mine. She was only 8, yet already learning fear no child should know. The house felt heavier with each passing day. My mother's cough grew worse, and Ava grew quieter, her laughter replaced with nervous glances whenever footsteps sounded in the hall. I tried to protect them, to carry the weight alone, but I was breaking too. When I went to work, I thought I could bury it under routine. I smiled at my patients, spoke gently, and tried to act like everything was normal. But my smile didn't reach my eyes. I saw the way people looked at me, as if they knew something was wrong. My hands shook when I held charts. My mind wandered when I should have been focused. The hospital had always been my escape, but now even that felt hollow. One evening, as I was finishing up paperwork, my colleague Jordan sat across from me. He studied me quietly for a moment before asking, Claire, do you feel safe at home? His voice was soft, but the question hit me harder than any insult I had heard from Ethan's family. I wanted to deny it, to brush it off with a laugh, but the truth pressed against my chest until it was too heavy to ignore. For the first time, I admitted it to myself. I wasn't safe. And worse, neither were my mother or daughter. I nodded faintly, unable to find words. Jordan didn't push, but his eyes told me he understood. That moment stayed with me long after I left the hospital. As I drove home, the thought circled in my mind again and again. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep pretending things would get better when they never did. Something inside me shifted. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to find a way out. Not just for me, but for the 2 people who depended on me most. I stopped waiting for change. The only way forward was to prepare quietly, step by step, without letting anyone know what I was doing. Every cruel word, Every action meant to break me down, I began to record. I wrote dates, times, and exact details in a notebook I kept hidden at the bottom of my work bag. If Patricia insulted my mother, I wrote it down. If Nicole snapped at Ava, I wrote it down. If Ethan ignored me or sided with them, I recorded that too. What once only hurt me now became evidence. Along with the notebook, I started taking photos. If my mother's cough grew worse after a night of cold drafts, I made a note. If Ava cried after being shouted at, I wrote her words exactly as she said them. I stopped thinking of myself as powerless. Quietly, I was gathering the truth piece by piece. At the hospital, during a short break, I spoke with Marissa, a friend I trusted who worked as a lawyer. I didn't tell her everything at once, only enough for her to understand. She looked at me with steady eyes and told me what to collect before making any move. Keep records. Bank statements, proof of neglect, anything that shows a pattern. When the time comes, you'll need it. Her calm voice gave me direction when my heart was in chaos. Following her advice, I opened a savings account in my own name. Every paycheck, I slipped a small amount aside. It wasn't much at first, but each deposit felt like a step toward freedom. No one knew about it. Not Ethan, not his mother, not his sister. That secrecy was my strength. But while I stayed quiet, his family pushed harder. Patricia's tone grew sharper, Nicole's smirks more obvious. They seemed to take my silence as surrender. Ethan followed their lead, acting colder each day. Their behavior cut deep, but instead of reacting, I kept my head down and let them believe I was too tired to fight. All the while, my notebook filled, my savings grew, and my plan took shape. One evening, while I tucked Ava into bed, she looked at me with wide, sad eyes. "Mom," she whispered, "why doesn't Dad love us like you do?" The question pierced me more than any insult ever could. I felt my throat close, but I forced myself to stay calm for her sake. I brushed her hair back gently and kissed her forehead. "Get some sleep, sweetheart," I said softly, even as tears burned behind my eyes. When she closed her eyes, I sat beside her for a long time, listening to her breathing. In my heart, I made a promise she would never hear out loud. They will never hurt you again. Whatever it took, however long it took, I would find a way to keep her and my mother safe. I noticed the first sign by accident. A bill came in the mail marked overdue, though I had been careful with every payment. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I opened my laptop and checked our joint account. My breath caught when I saw the balance. Almost everything was gone. I went through the statements line by line. The transfers were clear, money leaving our account and showing up in Patricia and Nicole's names. It wasn't a single mistake. It was a pattern, steady and deliberate. Every dollar I worked for, every hour I spent away from Ava and my mother, was being drained behind my back. My hands shook as I closed the screen. A part of me wanted to march into the living room and scream at Ethan, demand an explanation. But deep down, I already knew there was more to uncover. That night, when he left his phone on the table, I picked it up. I told myself I wouldn't go through it. I told myself I still had boundaries. But I unlocked it anyway, because I needed to know the truth. What I found made my stomach twist. Messages with another woman, long conversations that stretched late into the night. Plans for hotel stays, trips outside the city, dinners I never knew about. He wasn't just careless, he was unfaithful, and he didn't even bother to hide it. There was a photo too. Her smile staring back at me, his words beneath it filled with affection I hadn't heard from him in years. My chest went tight, but I didn't cry. I sat in silence, staring at the screen, until the coldness inside me grew heavier than the pain. Days later, as if the money and the affair weren't enough, I heard Patricia and Nicole whispering in the kitchen. Their voices carried, sharp and smug. "She'll never stand up to you," Patricia said. "She's too busy with her job to notice. Just move on. Find someone better." Nicole laughed. "Claire's replaceable. She always has been." I stood in the hallway, listening, feeling my heart pound in my ears. Replaceable. That was the word they used for me, the woman who worked through endless nights to keep food on the table, the woman who carried the weight of everyone while they sat in comfort. I could have walked in, confronted them, screamed until my throat tore. But I didn't. I stayed in the shadows, quiet, controlled. The anger in me no longer burned hot. It had hardened into something colder, sharper. I understood then that sadness was a luxury I could no longer afford. Whatever love I had once felt was gone. In its place was a vow. They thought they had broken me, but all they had done was make me certain. I would leave, yes, but not before I destroyed the hold they believed they had over my life. I learned quickly that the only way to move forward was to stay quiet. If I showed anger, they would only use it against me. If I argued, they would call me dramatic. So I kept my voice calm, my face smooth, and I played the part they expected. I set dinner on the table, I nodded when Patricia made her comments, and I even managed a small smile when Nicole smirked in my direction. Inside, though, every moment was measured, every detail recorded. When no one was watching, I gathered proof. I printed bank statements showing the missing money. I took screenshots of Ethan's messages when I had the chance. I wrote down each moment that put my mother or Ava in danger, from the night they were left outside to the way Patricia treated them as if they were unwanted guests. I kept copies in a folder hidden at the hospital, safe from curious hands at home. Through a colleague I trusted, I found a small apartment. It wasn't big, but it was safe, and it was ours. I signed the paperwork quietly, my hands steady even though my heart raced. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of control. I imagined Ava sleeping in peace, my mother resting without fear, and that picture pushed me forward. I started to move things out little by little. A bag of Ava's clothes one night, a box of my mother's medicine the next. I carried them out in plain sight, pretending they were work bags, grocery bags, anything ordinary. No one paid attention. They were too busy talking about themselves to notice me chipping away at their control. Every night before Ava went to bed, I sat beside her. I held her close and whispered in her ear, "Hold on, sweetheart. We're almost free." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded, her small hand clutching mine tightly. Her eyes held trust, and that trust kept me strong. Helen watched me too, her quiet gaze sharper than words. She never asked questions, but when our eyes met, I knew she understood. Her cough still lingered, but when I packed away her medicine in a bag, she didn't protest. She was ready. The days dragged, but I forced myself to stay patient. Each act of cruelty, each insult, I swallowed down with a steady face. I let them think I was broken, that I had no fight left. In reality, every step I took was moving me closer to freedom. They saw a dutiful wife, but I was building an escape. The silence became my weapon. They mistook it for weakness, and I let them. Because soon, without warning, I would be gone. And they would never see it coming. The night finally came when the house was quiet, and Ethan was gone. He had said he would be working late, and I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. My heart pounded as I checked every room to make sure Patricia and Nicole were asleep. The silence felt heavy, but I forced myself to move quickly and carefully. I went first to my mother. She was lying on the couch, her blanket pulled up to her chin. When I touched her shoulder, her eyes opened at once, as if she had been waiting. "It's time," I whispered. She gave a small nod, and I helped her sit up. Her breathing was shallow, her cough still rough, but her eyes were steady. Then I went to Ava's room. She stirred when I touched her hair, her small body curling closer to me. "Get up, sweetheart," I whispered. "We have to go now." She didn't ask questions. She slid out of bed, rubbing her eyes, and reached for her shoes. We moved through the house like shadows, careful not to make a sound. I carried 2 bags I had packed earlier, filled with the things we needed most. Every step toward the door felt endless, but finally we reached it. The air outside was sharp and cold, burning against our faces. Ava's breath fogged in front of her, and my mother shivered, pulling her blanket tighter. I guided them quickly to the car parked at the curb. Ava climbed into the back seat, clutching her blanket. I helped my mother into the front, making sure she was settled before closing the door softly. For a moment, I stood still, my eyes on the house. The windows glowed faintly, warm and bright, but for me, it had become a prison. When I got into the driver's seat, my mother reached across and squeezed my hand. Her grip was weak, but full of meaning. "I knew you'd find the strength," she whispered. Her words almost broke me, but I held back the tears and turned the key. The engine came to life, low and steady like a promise. We drove slowly down the street, the tires crunching over the frozen road. My hands were tight on the wheel, my eyes fixed ahead, but in the mirror I saw the house shrinking behind us. I didn't look too long. I didn't want to give it power over me anymore. It was only shadows now, filled with chains I was finally breaking. Ava leaned against the seat, her eyes heavy with sleep, while my mother coughed softly beside me. I reached over and placed my hand on her knee, steadying her, steadying myself. We were leaving behind cruelty, leaving behind fear. For the first time in years, I felt air in my lungs that wasn't laced with anger. We didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but at least it would be ours. The day in court came faster than I expected. Sitting there, I felt my heart beating hard, but I also knew I was ready. I had spent weeks preparing, gathering every piece of proof, every record, every detail they thought I would never use against them. When the judge asked for evidence, I laid it all out clearly. Bank statements showing where the money went, screenshots of conversations Ethan thought I would never see, and medical notes about my mother's condition after that night. Nothing was exaggerated, nothing was missing. The courtroom was quiet as my lawyer presented each piece. Every page told the truth they had tried to hide. The judge listened carefully, his eyes narrowing at the numbers and the messages. For once, I felt like my voice mattered, even though I barely had to speak. When the witnesses were called, our neighbors stepped forward. They told the court what they had seen, how my mother and daughter had been locked outside in the freezing dark. Their words were steady, their accounts matching what I had written down. I sat there, my hands clasped tightly, as the truth spread across the room like light cutting through a closed curtain. Ethan tried to deny everything. He leaned forward, shaking his head, saying it wasn't true, that I had misunderstood. But his words were weak against the hard proof in front of everyone. Patricia sat stiff in her chair, pretending to be shocked, insisting she had done nothing wrong. Nicole smirked at first, but as the evidence piled up, the smirk disappeared. Their stories fell apart the longer they spoke. The lies tangled until they were left exposed, with nothing to shield them. When it was time for the judge to speak, the room fell completely silent. His voice was firm, leaving no space for doubt. He granted me full custody of Ava. He made it clear that Ethan had endangered her and that he would not be allowed visitation. He ordered restitution for what had been taken, a sum that Ethan could not escape. I sat still, listening, almost unable to breathe. For so long I had lived under their control, waiting for the next cruel word or the next betrayal. Now it was ending right in front of me. Patricia and Nicole lowered their heads, their pride crushed in front of everyone. The same community that once saw me as quiet and reserved now saw the truth for themselves. As the judge closed the case, I felt something inside me shift. The weight that had sat on my chest for years finally began to lift. I walked out of that courtroom with my mother's hand in mine and Ava skipping beside me. For the first time in a long time, the air felt light, and I could breathe without fear. The new house was small but filled with light. Every corner felt different from where we had come from. There was no shouting, no cold silence, only the sound of voices that cared for one another. The first thing I did was make Ava's room her own. She chose the colors herself, bright and cheerful, and I painted the walls while she sat on the floor, humming softly. When we placed her toys on the shelves, she smiled in a way I had not seen in a long time. My mother settled into her own space with relief. She no longer had to keep her bag by the door, ready for the next cruel moment. Her cough eased slowly, and each day she grew stronger. She often sat by the window with a book, her face calmer than it had been in years. Ava's laughter began to return. She played in the yard, her footsteps quick and free, not hesitant or afraid. At night she still woke sometimes, but instead of panic, she now reached for me and drifted back to sleep with ease. One quiet evening, after reading her a story, I tucked her into bed and smoothed the blanket over her small shoulders. Her eyes closed peacefully. I bent close and whispered, "No one will ever lock us out again." She gave a soft sigh, and I knew she believed me. As I stepped out of her room, I felt a calm strength settle in me. Betrayal had nearly broken us, but it also pushed me to fight for a better life. And standing in that warm, safe home, I understood. Sometimes pain destroys you, but sometimes it builds the fire you need to finally be free.